Time for football at 4, and as we told you, a little football news for us here at 97.3 ESPN. You hear the countdown to kickoff show Mondays, Thursdays, and Sunday, Eagle game days. Whenever the Eagles play on Monday, countdown to kickoff moves to Monday. If they play on a Thursday, which they don't again this year, but Colin Thompson, one of the co-hosts of the show, who, by the way, does a great job.
He does.
Really breaks down. Just played the game, played with current players, just knows a lot of the current players. It's one thing to hear former players give analysis, but they didn't play in this game.
Right.
This guy is a young guy and played with these particular players.
Yeah, great insight.
So
good for him.
He's going to the XFL and going to the Tampa Bay Vipers, which means hopefully, I'm very intrigued by this XFL. I did a lot of stuff on it last night and the whole AAF thing and that mess, and I think the XFL has got its head on straight. I think they're going in a good, I feel like when I go on Twitter, they are everywhere.
They do seem like they're legit and doing everything the right way. Everything looks legitimate and professional, and like they could potentially be around for a long time. I think we're all rooting for it.
It's interesting because...
But the AAF looked like that, too.
Yeah, the AAF did look like it was professional and it was going to be well run. I read that whole article last night about what a mess that thing was. After reading that article, they should have never even started that thing. They should have never even launched it and got it off the ground.
Clearly, they couldn't pay anyone.
Well,
Week 1.
But they knew that before they launched it. Reading that article was like, okay, they knew this was going to be a failure. It was just Charlie Ebersol was so... It all basically is, apparently he was in an airplane accident and he lived, and after that he was like, I don't care, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, whatever, and he was very appreciative that he was alive, and basically knew that this was going to fail, but always wanted to start his own football league, so just did it.
Jeez.
Even though
he
knew
didn't
it
care.
was going to fail.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, he actually tried to partner with McMahon, and McMahon said, nah, you do your thing, I'll do mine, we'll be okay.
Good move by McMahon.
All right, so we'll dive into some more NFL right now. Johnny Mac, do you think the XFL has a shot?
For Colin Thompson's sake, I hope so. But if you want me to tell the truth, no.
Do you think it has at least 3 years? Because, that's a good lifespan as a player.
Yeah, I mean, they have enough money, and Vince has earmarked enough money for 3 years, so it can last for 3 years. But as I always say with rich people, Tom Dundon's a perfect example of this, who did have the money. And I'm upset that you needed to read this article because I told you all this stuff in real time, like the AAF was a disaster and Reggie Fowler was a con man. And it turned out to be true. But they have earmarked 3 years of money, but rich people don't like losing money, and there's no revenue streams. The TV contracts are bartered, so they're on good platforms, but they're not getting any money for it.
Are you surprised that McMahon, with all of the, he's been with the USA Network for years, he's on Fox now, that he couldn't get some sort of I know he's got Fox and ESPN, which are very big, but now they're not paying. The AAF paid to be on. They're not paying to be on, but they're also not getting paid to be on.
Yes, exactly. So it's a little bit better.
But are you surprised that McMahon was not able to get a better deal?
No, because there's no reason. You have to understand it from the television executive side. And I covered this stuff extensively with the AAF, the XFL, and AEW, which is Philadelphia Tonight, the wrestling company. Understand when you start a new company, there's no history. So from a TV platform standpoint, they're saying, we're giving you this channel, which is great for you. You don't have to pay. They're not going to pay. And the second part of that, the worst part is the rabbit hole. And once you say, okay, I will take the platforms. I'm not trying to diminish Fox or ESPN or FS1 or any of those because they're legitimate, big-time channels. But once you go down that route, you know what they're going to say in 3 years? They're going to say, even if you're a success because of us, because of this platform, we're not going to pay you. You can continue to be on the station.
Yeah.
But
and I just might, the AAF had decent ratings. I mean, so you could say, look, we're delivering some pretty good ratings for you.
Yeah, from a television standpoint, it's all about rights fees, and that's why the NFL, like I always say, the NFL is a $15 business. If you take away the TV contract, I think people don't understand. You cut that in half, and it's really, you cut it more than half because there's $8 billion of that comes directly from TV. But then you talk about all the ancillary revenue, whether it's merchandising or anything of that nature. Well, that's driven by the platforms. That's driven by TV. So when you're talking about the most powerful people in sports, it's not Roger Goodell, it's not Adam Silver. It's the television executives who are signing these checks to these organizations.
Right, and we hear that a lot.
And they're not getting organizations like the AAF, the XFL, AEW Wrestling, they're not getting those checks. It's impossible for them to compete. Now, the XFL, I'm not trying to say, they're not trying to compete with the NFL. That would be silly, but there's no revenue streams to turn a profit.
Yeah.
So what you have is a vanity project for a rich guy, and at some point he's going to say, I'm sick of losing money, and I'm going to pull the plug. The same thing Tom Dundon did. Colin, I hope you're not listening to this.
He is not. He is actually, I've just texted back and forth to him. He is at football practice where he coaches a youth football team down in Lower Cape May. But I know, look, we've talked a lot about business of sports stuff. He understands the challenges of these things, but a lot of these guys, they want to keep playing and they want to try to get their eye of NFL teams, right?
No, it's great for the players. It's great. I mean, and I hope it lasts as long as possible. And they can. You saw a lot of the AAF guys getting second chances and second opportunities in the NFL. From a player's perspective, it's great to have this other avenue. That's no question. I'm just talking strictly from a business standpoint. The model is just not sustainable. People don't get into business generally to lose money. And there can be, as I said, vanity projects. And Vince did not like how the original XFL failed, and he wanted to give it another chance to sort of wipe that blemish from his resume, and that's why he's doing this. There's no other reason, and he's going to have two blemishes on his resume.
That's unfortunate. All right, let's get it back to the Eagles. John McMullen at JF McMullen. A lot of news today at NovaCare. One, Jason Peters, surprisingly week to week all of a sudden. Did we know this? I mean, did we know? I saw him leave the game, but he did come back. So what do we know about Jason Peters?
Well, he did leave, and he came back for a very short period, and then he left again. So Andre Dillard ended up playing, I think, 47. So he played 47 reps. So he played the majority of the game. We kind of knew it was going to be a more than he wasn't going to play in Dallas. The question is, how long is the injury going to be? And week to week, and Doug Peterson's lexicon usually means multiple weeks. So now the question is, how bad is it? How long is it going to last? Jason was out at practice today and sort of acting as an extra coach and trying to get Andre Dillard up to speed. So I don't think it's terribly significant because if it were really significant, they wouldn't have him out there, and he wouldn't be walking around, wouldn't be doing anything. So I do think he's going to miss multiple weeks, but I don't think it's really, really serious.
What'd you think of Dillard?
He did not play.
Which I would imagine you're a little surprised by, because I know that you thought he played very well in the preseason.
Yeah, he was great in the preseason, but we talked about the preseason a lot. And, generally as a backup player in the preseason, you don't have to face Everson Griffin and Donnell Hunter. And that's kind of what happened. And that was, and then you have it on the road in a regular season environment. So it was really, really tough situation for any rookie. And especially when you don't prepare to be a starter during the week. We talk about that all the time. You're just thrust into there, and people can say, well, he's got to be ready because Jason Peters has a history of leaving games, and that's correct. But this is a rookie player. This guy isn't a veteran who's been around for years. So this is the first time he played 16 snaps before he had to go into that game through 5 games. So he barely played, and then all of a sudden you're saying go out there and block Everson Griffin, and he didn't do well. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, he was the worst tackle in football. But he's not going to face, that's the good news, like the Eagles cornerbacks, you're not going to face those types of players every single week. He's preparing to be a starter this week. And now Dallas also has good defensive ends, Robert Quinn, and I imagine they'll put Marcus Lawrence over there to test him at least a little bit. So it's not easy again this week, but you hope the preparation and the fact he knows he's going to start will help out a little bit.
How does it change the game plan for the Eagles and, on the other side, the Cowboys?
Well, certainly the Cowboys are going to circle him. And as I mentioned, they have 2 really good edge rushers. And at times, I think they will try to get that matchup with DeMarcus, as I said, especially in third long situations. You know, it's interesting. One of the rare things, the Eagles got blown out, but they really did a good job of staying out of third and longs. So the offense really should have had more success. If they get into third and long situations in Dallas, they're probably going to have to max protect a little bit more than they would like to, and probably put Dallas Goedert on that side of the football.
John, you know, the next questions will be defensive back oriented, and the lack of move last night. There was 2 defensive backs traded. The Eagles not in on any of them. Was that a surprise when you saw Peters traded, and then later on in the night Ramsey traded, that Howie didn't get involved?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise he didn't get involved with Peters. They weren't, and then Jalen Ramsey just pulled himself out, and he said he was doing all that stuff. And hey, whether you think he was faking a back injury or not, I guarantee he's going to be healthy and playing for Los Angeles. So, and once Shad Khan gave then they were going to take the best available package deal, and the Eagles just weren't going to go that high. So it's not that they weren't interested or not, it's that other teams were more.
So what is the Eagles game plan, specifically Howie Roseman in the front office? Because we're going through all these injuries, and you mentioned it earlier, John, when Doug Peterson says week to week, it typically is not a good sign. And it seems like he's saying that more and more about more positions and more players. You have Deshaun Jackson, which is still a question mark, and obviously Jason Peters now, and Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills were practicing this week, but Tim Jernigan's still out. Yeah, Nigel Bradham. I mean, the list goes on and on. So at what point does Howie say, all right, I need to pick up the phone here and do something before the trade deadline, or is that just not something he's going to force?
I do think the Eagles will make a move before the trade deadline. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't necessarily think it's corner at this stage, and they are pretty sure Jalen Mills is going to play against Dallas. I think the question is how much. Ronald Darby was practiced today, so that's trending well. At least he has an opportunity to get back out there. So all of a sudden, you get some of these corners back. And Cre'Von LeBlanc was eligible to start practicing today. The Eagles wanted to designate him to return. He's on injured reserve, has to be out 8 weeks, so he can't return until after week 8, but he could have begun practicing. He did not. So that's going to take a little bit longer, evidently. But they are getting healthier. They are getting Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills, but they're better than Sol Douglas and Sidney Jones. So you can't get the big fish. You try to catch a bunch of little fishes. Well, and that's what the Eagles are trying to do.
Well, do you think, okay, so they don't get, they don't make a big trade. They don't pull the trigger on that type. Now, they still have 2 weeks to do so, by the way.
Yeah.
But I've been talking, I tweeted this out last night that, they had that awful game against the Saints. Somebody was just killing them. It's like, they played with Sullivan, Bosby, LeBlanc. Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a lot last year. And then once they got their guys back slowly, their defense kind of restabilized it. Do they have the same mindset? Darby and Mills maybe aren't get us to where we need to be.
No, I think they're hopeful they do get them where they need to be. But I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. Like I said, they wanted Jalen Ramsey, but they weren't able to get it. They set a threshold that they weren't going to go above, and that wasn't able to get it done. And then you go to the contingency plan, which is get these guys healthy and get them up to speed. I think the disappointing part from the Eagles standpoint, you mentioned, Mike, Sullivan and Bosby. And look, Rasul and Sidney are supposed to be better than those guys. And, hey, Rasul has been for most of the season until last week. So maybe he doesn't deserve to be put in that category. But he certainly was that bad last week. So ultimately, if you get Darby back, if you get Mills back, and Rasul is in the mix, and Avonte Maddox gets healthy, and Cravon eventually does return, that should be enough to get you to where you were before. And where you were before was a Super Bowl champion and a team that won a playoff game and nearly won another playoff game to go to the NFC Championship game last year. So you can't have a superstar at every position, and they've done it before, and they'll try to do it again.
What's the mood? I mean, the Eagles are on the road now, but we talked a lot earlier, John, about the Eagles-Cowboys rivalry, and I just want your thoughts on the mood around the team when it's Eagles-Cowboys week, and especially coming after a loss on the road. Is it tense? I mean, Doug Peterson seems like he is very impatient and a little distraught at times with the Philadelphia media over the past couple weeks, especially after this most recent loss, and he comes out and basically guarantees a win, however you want to describe it, which is uncharacteristic of him, I think is a good way to put it. So how do you think the Eagles are right now, just culture-wise, behind the scenes, behind closed doors, and are the leaders doing what they need to do?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons Zac Brown isn't here. I think there was a little bit of a Michael Bennett effect in that he did not fit from a personality standpoint with this locker room and with this team. So I think there is a little messaging, even though the Eagles won't admit it publicly. That's what's going on as far as Zac Brown and what went on last week, and just the way he does business. It's not the way the Eagles want to do business. So I think that's sort of an alert to the players to try to get them back on the same page and things of that nature. It's interesting. The Eagles got a lot of Dallas questions today, and what's your biggest memory of the rivalry? And everybody was kind of bored with it. I don't know if that's the right term, but not coming up with any answers. It doesn't have the feel of a rivalry week yet, and maybe that's because both teams are struggling and both teams are still kind of licking their wounds. Cowboys have lost 3 straight. They're not going to have Amari Cooper. They're not going to have Teron Smith. They're not going to have La'el Collins. So they're hurting probably more than the Eagles. And then I think, there's typically a 24-hour rule in the NFL. Win or lose, you got to put the last game behind you. I think the Eagles have had a little bit more trouble than usual just because of how that game unfurled. So I imagine it'll ramp up later in the week, but it is a slow start from what is a first-place game in the NFC East.
You can hear that game Sunday night right here on 97.3 ESPN. And, of course, the Eagles and the Cowboys. You just mentioned it. We talked about it a little earlier about Ryan's almost 30 years old. The Cowboys have never been good.
In my lifetime.
They have never been good in his lifetime. It just feels like I kind of agree. I'm not a big Eagles-Cowboys guy. I'm not that guy that just my week is great when the Cowboys lose. I don't really give a crap about the Cowboys. I think it's the Giants is more that week. And but do you feel that this game has kind of lost that luster that it used to have?
I don't think it's as intense as it once was, and I don't know if that's just a modern player versus when there was real angst between the organizations and they really didn't like each other. But I think you see that in sports. People talk about it in the NBA all the time. I guess it goes back to Isaiah Thomas and Magic kissing in midcourt. And where did the anger go from? Where rivalries had. But I don't think that's just Eagles Cowboys. I think it's everywhere. Maybe except the one that seems to have kept it for the years is Baltimore Pittsburgh. Those two teams hate each other. But even that with guys like Terrell Suggs leaving and moving on, you lose some of that as you go on. So I don't think that's just an Eagles thing or a Cowboys thing. I think that's the NFL in general. I get it. It seems to me that the biggest rivalries are between fan bases on social media. You don't see that anger between the players any longer. They're all trading jerseys and just happy to see their friends.
Yeah. So real quick, I know you wrote about this, and Doug was asked about it. Did you get a definitive answer as to why Zac Brown is no longer here?
Well, behind the scenes, as I said, it's kind of a personality thing. The Eagles claimed it had nothing to do with his comments about Kirk Cousins. And I compared it to Michael Bennett, and Michael lasted the whole season, but the Eagles traded him. And you say, why did they trade him? He's so successful. Didn't fit in. And you see some of the problems he's now having in New England. Kind of a, off the beaten path kind of guy. And Zach's a little bit the same way. And if you can take him the wrong way, he's really blunt. He's really honest. And I think they had an issue with how he fit in the locker room. And then the production also wasn't great. If he was playing, for instance, at a Michael Bennett level, I think they would have put up for it at least for a year and then moved on after the season. But they think they can get similar production, although I don't know if that's true. One thing, Zach is not very good in pass coverage, but this team entered that Minnesota game number one ranked in the NFL in rushing defense. 63 yards a game. He's a run-stuffing linebacker. So, he's part of that. And now all of a sudden you're going to go into a game where you're facing Ezekiel Elliott and probably Nate Gary and Camus Grugier-Hill, who played, Nate was a safety at Nebraska. Camus was a rover in college. Yeah, I'd rather have Zac Brown tackling Zeke Elliott. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up there. We'll see. We'll get more into the matchup here, where the Cowboys and the Eagles, how they match up tomorrow and Friday. And, of course, John McMullen. Follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter. Another edition of Football at 4 in the books. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.